now be reconsidered. Is there a second? Well, there's a second. Is there any discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor of reconsidering House Bill 2000, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. And that, ladies and gentlemen, this bill is now back before this committee. And that, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, who may, again, this may be new to them, that is how we do things in the Senate. And so Senator Favola is doing that and giving consideration that in the same way we would give to her if something on the other side, if it was a partisan issue, would have come up and the bill would not have reported. But it was important that one of the Democrats would have needed to vote or would vote properly. So we do that. That does not reflect upon Senator Favola, and I appreciate your doing that as a courtesy. It demonstrates again that we do it better in the Senate than they do in the House of Delegates. If you're with me, clap. I know Senator Delegate Poindexter, you don't maybe not agree with that, but this is how we get along around here. There are only 40 of us. Delegate Poindexter, please come forward and present House Bill 2000.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and I do hope everyone in the audience is as understanding as I am and appreciative of the good governance that occurs in the state Senate. Thank you, Senator Favola, for following through with that. I would like to think that we do the same thing over the House side. This bill, as I go through, I'm going to describe it very briefly, as I did the other day. I'd ask you to keep in the back of your minds that there is some public safety involvement in it, but it's mostly a matter of law. It's a simple bill, straightforward. No locality shall adopt any ordinance, procedure, or policy that restricts the enforcement of federal immigration law less than that of the full extent permitted by federal law. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we can all agree, I think, that there are problems in the immigration system in the United States of America. But I hope we can also agree that we are a state and a nation that operate under the rule of law. If one doesn't like a law, if a group doesn't like a law, if I don't like the law, if I disagree with the law, I still obey that law. And then I work to change that law, whatever it is. I work through the legislative process, I work through elections, and of course the courts are standing by to do the judgment and the correctness of that type of thing. This bill is I bring it to ensure that Virginia jurisdictions follow the rule of the law, just as simple as that. Now, it's certain that the great majority of immigrants and the great majority of every group in the Commonwealth and the United States are great people. They mean to obey the law, they mean to have a good life, they mean to learn to live the American dream, to achieve the American dream. But the truth is, in every group, there are just a handful that don't obey the law and, quite frankly, are evil and do evil things. Now, we have jurisdictions in some parts of the United States that have set up sanctuaries that actually allow some people that do not behave themselves to live and dwell and to do bad things in that sanctuary and go outside that sanctuary and do bad things. I'll just mention 3 or 4. I think we're all familiar with the Kate Stanley case in California, Frederick, Maryland, Texas, D.C. gangs down in Loudoun County, Kentucky, New York City. These bad things have happened all over the country. We had a bad case in Virginia a couple of years ago up in Prince William County. We had a bad case in Virginia Beach about a year ago. And fairly recently, one in Loudoun, and certainly other examples, including one in Franklin County where a citizen was killed by a not so nice person. Having said that, the purpose of this bill is to ensure that no Virginia jurisdiction provides cover, a hideout, if you would, for those few evil and conduct people. And yes, we've had a few locations in Virginia, Richmond, and Charlottesville today, although there have been rumors in a couple of other places that they would like to become sanctuary jurisdictions, cities, towns, or counties, or whatever. There's another aspect in my mind about this too, and that's when these cases, these rare cases, unusual cases occur. I don't know of any restitution, any way that the victim victims can find closure. One has a hideout in the sanctuary, lives there, operates there, goes outside, kills someone, maims someone, harms someone. There's just no overarching way to sort of prevent it. So I bring this bill because I think the legislature is the place to settle it by saying localities and local jurisdictions, you should not do this. My concluding argument really is that sanctuary jurisdictions really refuse to cooperate with federal immigration efforts. Some go as far as to pass laws, ordinances, and procedures explicitly prohibiting state or local officials from cooperating. It's a straightforward reason for that. These jurisdictions or these people just don't like federal immigration policy. Well, that justification is just inappropriate in this Commonwealth and in this country. America is a nation of laws. If you don't like the law, then you go try to change it. You don't flout it. That's not the way. That's independent of our whole system. Now, it's perfectly acceptable, I think, for a jurisdiction, including those that I mentioned, to decline to participate voluntarily in a lot of things as far as the federal immigrations are concerned. But for elected officials, especially, to set themselves above the law is a standard that we don't. We look at normal citizens and say you should obey the law, and I think we have an even higher standard for local officials that they have to obey the law. So that's my presentation to you, and I hope you consider the bill.
Thank you, Delegate Pointers. I appreciate that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start a clock when, well, after any questions from the panel, that will not be timed. If there are statements for people that come up and that speak in support or against, if they're asked questions, I ask that you hold the clock as well, so we can have that question being answered with the time that's there. So are there any questions of the patron?
Mr. Chair.
Let's start from the outside going in. Senator Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I need to clarify the record because I think the gentleman has said twice today that the city of Richmond is trying to become a sanctuary city. So I guess my first question would be, have you read Mayor Stoney's directive?
I have read statements in the paper about it, and the mayor did not say that. Some of his constituency is pushing him to move down that road. I read his clearance statement. What I meant to say, I hope I said it clearly, was that there's been talk in 2 jurisdictions of becoming sanctuary locations in Virginia.
Well, so, Mr. Chairman, I want to set the record. Mr. Chairman, I want to set the record straight. The city of Richmond has not taken action to become a sanctuary city as some of the cities outside of Virginia that you talked about. And many would argue that they are limited in some of the official actions they can take since we are dealing with state. But I do want to ask some questions related to what the city of Richmond did do.
Senator McClellan.
And I think that the issue with this bill is where it says that any policy or procedure that restricts enforcement of federal immigration laws to less than the full extent. What that means is you may be authorized but not required by federal law to do something, and if you don't do it, you are in violation of the state law. So what the mayor said was that the City of Richmond Police Department will not consent to participate in the Immigration Customs Enforcement 287G agreements, and which are not mandatory. The reason he did that was because in the City of Richmond, which is very focused on community policing, because it is effective in addressing crime, and we've had an uptick in violent crime in the City of Richmond, the policy that the City of Richmond has adopted is if there is an immigrant, whether documented or not, who is the victim of a crime or the witness to a crime, the city police are not going to ask that victim or witness about their immigration status, nor are they going to proactively seek out what their immigration status is, nor are they going to detain that victim or witness. Under your bill, by refusing to do that, the city of Richmond would be declared a sanctuary city under Virginia law in violation of House Bill 2000, correct?
I don't read the language that way, man.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator McClellan.
if you do not do all that you are authorized to do but are not mandated to do under federal law, aren't you in effect enforcing immigration laws less than to the full extent of the law, or restricting the enforcement of federal immigration laws to the full extent of the law?
I don't think so, Mr. Chairman. The wording there is permitted by federal laws, and ICE certainly is permissive as far as I know of the current policy of the city of Richmond and the surrounding jurisdiction.
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman,
Senator McClellan.
I think the language is very clear that if you have a policy that restricts the enforcement of federal immigration laws less than the full extent permitted by federal law, i.e. if you do not agree to enter into an ICE 287G agreement, you are in violation of this law. And I think that is the concern that many of us have, not only because of the importance of community police. I mean, there was a domestic violence victim in this country who ICE agents went into the courthouse and arrested and detained when that person was trying to get redress for a crime committed against her. And more likely than not, her abuser tipped off ICE to go get her. We are starting to go down a slippery slope of saying to the immigrant community, whether they're legal or not, we're going down a slippery slope to say, if you're a victim of a crime or a witness to a crime, don't talk to the police, because they're going to take you in, they're going to detain you and sort out your status later. There are also concerns about the education policies. If you have a child in a school whose parent may or may not be here legally, if the school does not inquire as to that parent's status, is that school enforcing federal immigration law to the full extent permitted? So I think, with all due respect, this law as written is extremely broad and basically says to all of our localities to detain first, ask questions later.
Is there a question in there, Senator McClellan?
Isn't that true? Isn't that so?
Well, that's a good finish right there.
I actually do have two questions.
Well, is there, allow the delegate to respond if he.
To the extent, I don't quite agree with that broadly, and I don't see anything in the language that would prevent a locality or require a locality to sign a voluntary agreement with ICE. The federal regs that I have read is that in my words, that localities may sign up for different agreements, and they have across the country depending on different conditions.
Thank you, Delegate.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Vola.
well, before I get to my question, I would just say that the conversation that just took place, I think, shows the confusion at a minimum that your bill would bring into the statute. So my two questions. First, it appears that this bill is actually trying to usurp federal regulations that grant cities and localities options. It's coming from the local government. I know for a fact that local governments were allowed leeway in interpreting some of the laws related to when alleged perpetrators should be detained. There were actually there's some flexibility in those regulations. But the flexibility seems to be eradicated in your bill because you say to the full extent permitted by federal law. Well, federal law may have one level of, option, if you will, for local government, and yet there would be some less restrictive options that local governments could abide by, and your bill would remove that, even though the federal government would be giving the flexibility to jurisdictions. Is that not true?
Mr. Chairman, I don't read it that way. I think the language there that we're reading says that you won't pass anything that's against the main laws. And if you have any agreements, voluntary agreements with ICE, then you have to fulfill them to the terms of what you signed up for, which you chose, which was your decision.
Mr. Chairman, I guess the confusing part of this bill, it says to the full extent permitted by federal law. And so the flexibility that's granted in regulation, I believe, would be prohibited by this bill. Could General Counsel respond to my questions, Mr. Chairman?
DB?
Mr. Chairman, I think that it could be taken both ways.
What if we just struck to the fullest extent? Absolutely. After immigration laws, period, and then strike to less than the full extent permitted by federal law. Well, hold on, let's talk about that first. Does that clear up the problem? I mean, because then you have, no locality shall adopt any ordinance, procedure, or policy that restricts the enforcement of federal immigration laws, period.
Mr. Chairman, I think.
And then you're not getting into the degree of anything less than the full
Could you read
extent.
that back, please?
Yes, sir. What we're talking about here now is because it seems to be one of the main questions, our hangups, and I don't think it will change much over here, but amending your bill to strike, to put a period after laws and strike everything else to the end of the line of line 12, so that it would read, no locality shall adopt any ordinance, procedure, or policy that restricts the enforcement of federal immigration laws, period.
I don't think you can dress up this pig in any fashion, but that's your amendment.
We call that lipstick on the pig.
This is a bad bill, but
We understand that, but that's your opinion, and that's been clear from the beginning. Delegate Poindexter, because of the different way, and I think, Dave, this is what you're partially saying, is that it's almost subjective what the fullest extent permitted by federal law may or may not be. Is that right, DB?
But Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that instead of arguing about the last half of the sentence, and they arguing to be about, what is.
I'm sure they'd like to strike all 2 lines of the whole thing. What Favola's amendment would be.
I don't really have a problem with that.
Well,
You're
would you-
saying a period at the end of laws.
It would be after laws, there would be a period, and then strike to less than the full extent permitted by federal law. Is that right, Dave? And does that clear up some of the legal issue in terms of, which basically says no locality shall adopt any ordinance, procedure, or policy that restricts the enforcement of federal law, immigration law, period. Does it, or is it still, because, I mean, we don't want to do harm to the delegate's bill if that's not what he wants.
Mr. Chairman, I think it would have the effect of clearing up the distinction between what's permitted by law and what's required by the federal law, which is, I think, what the confusion is here now. So cutting out that line would clear up if that's what the delegate is going for.
Delegate Poindexter, we're not going to do anything to your bill that you don't want done or permit to be done. We don't have enough time to put things in, well, I guess we can't put them in conference. Today's the last day. It's up to you, delegate. Do you understand that would clear up? That just says, it's a firm statement, says the locality is not going to adopt any ordinance, procedure, or policy that restricts the enforcement of federal immigration laws, period. And that gets out the kind of equivocation that can be found in the words to less than full extent permitted by federal law. So it's up to you, delegate. If you want that, I'm sure someone here will offer that friendly amendment, but only if it's a friendly amendment, delegate. We're not going to do it if you.
I appreciate the consideration, Mr. Chairman. Restricts the enforcement of federal law. I'm agreeable to that.
You would agree, that would be a friendly amendment, delegate? Okay, can I have I need a motion on that. Motion and second being properly made. Any discussion on that? Favola has now drawn through 2 lines of the whole bill.
Mr. Chairman, I think
I understand.
this is one small problem, you still have a major problem.
I understand.
First one.
All right, any other discussion? No, and I understand exactly what you're saying. All right, hearing none, all in favor of adopting that amendment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And that amendment is adopted. Voice vote. Okay, so the amendment's before us. Delegate Poindexter, if you have anyone who would like to speak on behalf of this bill, you had people before. Is there anyone who's returning who would like to shed light on this?
Mr. Chairman, before we go to speakers, I have one other quick question.
Oh, I'm sorry, and we
which-
weren't done.
Which the
Sorry.
council, I think, could
Thought I'd
answer.
snuck it by you there, Senator Favola. Senator Favola.
Provide me. Are there any sanctuary cities in the Commonwealth? Cities or counties or townships? I mean, do we know of any?
Mr.
Delegate?
The legislation is presented. There is no definition of sanctuary city, town, or county in the code today. There's a general acceptance, I think, throughout everywhere, that sanctuary cities, towns, and counties, general definition, or governments that pass ordinances or have procedures or processes that are in conflict with federal law, explicitly or inexplicitly. Quite often, these are de facto policies where a sheriff or a mayor or whomever would say, well, we're just not going to do that, and you don't see it up there. So if you look at a formal definition and a formal one in Virginia, the answer is very clearly no. If you look at the possibility of being either clearly by ordinance process or procedure, or by de facto by policy and procedure, certainly the opportunity to do that.
So you're saying it's like prophylactic in that sense? Okay. Any more questions from you, Senator Favola?
No, and I'll be happy to hear the testimony.
Thank you. Senator Marsden.
Mr. Chairman, just very quickly, as the Dillon rules state, by what authority would any jurisdiction pass a law that would allow them to purposely negate federal immigration law?
I've seen cases of local governments pass laws that were against the Dillon rule. We had one in Norfolk a year or so ago. It's happened. It can happen again.
Mr. Chairman, just follow up.
Senator Marsden.
You know, if this is the case, there are all kinds of things the federal government does that, do we need to include that we're not going to do our own foreign policy, that we're not going to do any number of things? I mean, doesn't this comes out of nowhere. We don't have the problem. We're not likely to have the problem. We're a Dillon Rule state. Only the state could make a law that would allow a jurisdiction to do this, and we intend no such thing here. Why would we do this?
Mr. Senator Marston, we would do this because there is a likelihood of at least de facto, if not formal, declarations that have been discussed. There are people pushing local governments to move down this road, and I don't think we should do that in Virginia. I think we should say very clearly and hold our elected officials to a high standard of following whatever the law is.
Anyone? Questions? Seeing none, is there anyone here who would like to speak in favor of House Bill 2000 that has not already spoken before? Okay. Is there anyone here that would like to speak in opposition to House Bill 2000? If so, step forward. No one? No? I don't see anybody. Sleepy from lunch? Claire? Get up here. Come here. No. I have a question for you. And by the way, I have great fondness for Claire, ladies and gentlemen. So,
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Claire Rodriguez from Yaga.
Claire is always great to see you. I have a question, and it relates and it kind of came to me by listening to this. What would be the position of the ACLU if, say, the city of Petersburg or the city of, pick a city, said that we are not going to enforce any of the anti-discrimination laws that the federal government has? What would your position be on that?
There's a supremacy clause of the Constitution, and so if there is a federal law, it doesn't matter whether you're a Dillon Rule state or some other kind of state. Every state and locality is subject to federal law. It's a supremacy clause. It's why we now have marriage equality in Virginia, despite the fact that we have a constitutional amendment that says we don't.
So, are you saying then, and then extrapolating that to this, that because of the supremacy clause, any city in Virginia that says they're a sanctuary city are really fooling themselves?
Any city
That says that they're not going to enforce the immigration laws, the federal immigration laws, in the same way that they might say we're not going to enforce the anti-immigration, anti-discrimination federal laws.
Different.
How?
Because the federal law on immigration says that the federal government may delegate to a willing state or locality its authority to enforce federal immigration laws. If it does not do that, then you are preempted from enforcing federal immigration laws as a locality or a state. So you can enter into a 287G agreement, which is the name of the delegation of authority that gives you permission to enforce federal law on the behalf of the federal government under the federal government's supervision.
Which we don't
or
have
you
here.
can choose not to. And if you choose not to, while under common law, you might be able to exercise concurrent jurisdiction over criminal violations of immigration law. 2 Republican attorneys general have said that no state or local authority has the authority to enforce any civil violation of immigration law because of preemption.
So we don't have that kind of agreement. We don't enforce.
There's one 287G agreement remaining in Virginia. It's the Prince William Regional Jail. And they've had one for a long time. It's the only one that's currently extant in Virginia. Whether you choose as a locality or the state to enter into such an agreement is in fact that. It's a choice, as the patron points out. It's completely voluntary whether you choose to enforce the law.
Claire, it doesn't give us, the cities or towns or counties, the ability to ignore federal law, whether it be if there's a caveat in that law which allows the locality to enter into an agreement, but if they don't and otherwise have not got that agreement, then they still don't have the ability to just ignore federal law, especially like anti-discrimination or.
They're not
What if
ignoring
Norfolk said,
the-
you know what, we're not going to recognize the Supreme Court ruling that overturned the Defense of Marriage Act?
Well, because that's a constitutional standard. This is a statutory scheme in which the federal government has the unique and constitutionally protected responsibility to do foreign policy, of which immigration is part of it. And it preempts all state and local enforcement of immigration laws. Like, we have a law in the books of Virginia right now that says it's illegal under state law for an employer to employ somebody who's here without authority. That law is unconstitutional because it's preempted by federal law, because only the federal government can do immigration policy and immigration law. And so the only way you get to enforce federal immigration law in Virginia or any other state is through a delegated authority. You can, perhaps, exercise common law concomitant jurisdiction over a criminal violation, but figuring out which are civil and which are criminal is a really difficult thing to do. And so that's why most law enforcement people, if you put them up here and put them on the spot, would tell you that they don't know enough to be able to engage in the active enforcement of federal immigration law. Now, I just, I want to be sure we have the whole picture. There is a statute, 8 U.S.C. 1373, that says that it is illegal to get in the way of somebody who wants to cooperate with federal authorities. So there's a sort of a, if an individual in state government wants to cooperate individually with immigration authorities, that it is illegal to bar somebody from cooperating, but we don't have anybody doing that. And I think what's problematic about this bill in so many respects is, A, it uses the word sanctuary in the title, but nobody knows what sanctuary means. I mean, the fact is that people on one end of the political spectrum call sanctuary anything inclusive of passing a resolution saying you're a welcoming city. And people on the other end of the spectrum won't define as sanctuary anything that is an intersectional guarantee of peace in brown and black neighborhoods and addresses things well beyond immigration.
So Claire, then, one, if there's no agreement, let's just use Richmond as an example. Arizona said that they're an inclusive city. Let's just say you wrote a letter saying we're a sanctuary city, or we're a city that amounts to what people perceive as a sanctuary city. Without that agreement, though, it's just a fallacy.
Yeah.
It's a fallacy because
Well,
federal law trumps, I hate to use that word for people that don't like to hear that word.
But
I like to hear that word, but
more
it's okay.
importantly, add that.
But what
to
it
our-
does is it basically, what you're saying on the supremacy clause is it's a fallacy.
Well, and add that, I mean, Mayor Stoney did not declare
I
Richmond
get
a
that,
sanctuary
yeah.
city. I mean, but he was immediately told, the label was immediately applied because of this discontinuity of how you define it.
But if a city without that agreement says we're not gonna enforce federal immigration laws, we're not gonna enforce federal anti-discrimination laws or whatever, they make a whole list of federal laws we're not gonna enforce, that may be something that they say, but just because they say it doesn't make it true.
No, but you keep bringing, you have to be careful about trying to draw this parallel to anti-discrimination laws. The city is an employer covered by discrimination laws. The city is not obligated to enforce federal Title VII. It can get, a city can get, and a state can get, as we have, a deferral, and so our Department of Human Resources, Commission on Human Resources, does have deferral where it takes on the federal responsibility. But all of these things are voluntary. What I think is more important is to recognize where Virginia sits relative to other places in the United States. We're one of 2 states where every single person who's arrested and taken into custody has their immigration status checked, and
So-
ICE is immediately notified.
Craig, does this bill then just say that in recognition of the supremacy clause, that you as a locality can't pass an ordinance that's contrary to what federal law is, and specifically in this bill, federal immigration law?
The way that you've amended the law, you can argue that it says nothing more than in the federal constitutional system, you have to comply with federal law to the extent that it applies to you, period.
Okay, thank you, Claire. Any questions based on what I've asked? This is fine with this.
But do remember, I mean, the combination of our notice at arrest and custody, our law that was passed that says if you're within 5 days of the end of your sentence, you can be turned over to ICE early. We have all kinds of things on the books that make it impossible for anybody to proceed anywhere in Virginia as a sanctuary if you're a criminal, and a violent criminal particularly.
Thank you, Claire. You can still clean up if you want. All right, we're going to start the clock 10 minutes. I see both sides. Won't be alternating from side to side. Yes, sir. Please identify yourself. We love your pants.
I love them too.
Excellent.
I was known around here, they didn't know my name, but they called me that parish priest who wears plaid pants.
Nice.
Yeah. My name is Fletcher Lowe. I am a Virginian. I'm a constituent of Senator McClellan. And I'm not a lawyer, so all that went before, I can't answer. But I would ask you to take a look at your heart as you also look at your head. And think along with me in 4 ways. Rather than we as Virginians bring hostility, let us bring hospitality. Rather than we as Virginians bring fear, let us bring friendship. Rather than we as Virginians bring worry, let us bring welcome. Rather than we as Virginians to bring stress, let us bring compassion. Because we're known, Virginia is for lovers. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. Father will be accepting confessional in the back after this meeting. We're in double duty. Thank you, sir, for coming. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Pat Shipley, and I'm with the Interfaith Center here. But I'm also a retired United Methodist pastor, and I would like to share with you some excerpts from a recent statement by the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church. The General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church calls upon all policymakers to work for just and compassionate migration policies that inform the worth, dignity, and inherent value and rights of all persons, regardless of nationality or legal status. Supportive of churches offering sanctuary to migrants, Church and Society is especially concerned about the explicit targeting of communities determined to help those in need. As followers of Jesus Christ, we reject in the strongest terms efforts to penalize communities providing sanctuary, halt refugee resettlement, or impose a religious test on those facing forced migration. Immigrants and refugees sit in our pews and are behind our pulpits. United Methodists around the world are loving their neighbors by welcoming refugees and immigrants into their congregations and communities. We call on our political leaders and policymakers to follow their lead and compassionately welcome our sisters and brothers. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And you all please note how much time we have left so we can make sure everybody gets the topic.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Tram Nguyen. I'm the co-executive director of New Virginia Majority.
Welcome.
My family immigrated to the United States in 1981. 30 years ago as refugees from the Vietnam War. We settled in the west end of Henrico County in Senator Doug Vintner District, and I now have the pleasure of living in Senator Sturgeon in your district. The very first time in my life that I knew that I was different was 30 years ago in first grade, when my classmates in front of me had this debate on whether or not I was black or white, because we hadn't experienced anything else. Not too long after that, on our first family vacation to the beach, and my sisters and I jumped into our pool, very first pool, everybody else jumped out and said, "Chinks in the pool." So my family grew up knowing that we were different, and there was this very strong sense of unwelcomeness. And with that, my family, my parents encouraged my sisters and I to keep our heads down, to really focus on our education and do right and not get into trouble, and not to really interact with law enforcement. And so I mentioned these things as, as mentioned earlier, there are unintended consequences to this legislation. The message that it sends to the immigrant community, whether we are here legally or undocumented, is that we shouldn't interact with law enforcement, that we need to keep our heads down. And so that means that some crimes go unreported, and that does a disservice to our public safety in our community. So I urge you to really think about some of those unintended consequences. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for your advocacy. Ms. Hunt? Yes, ma'am.
Linda Higgins. I am the pastor of St. John's UCC here on Stewart Circle in Richmond. I'm a UCC minister, and as a UCC minister, the scripture that circles our immigration policy is the alien who resides with you shall be as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt, and I am the Lord your God. As an American church, and we are a national church, we know that we are a church of immigrants. We all came to the United States, and very few of us are Native American. And so thus we are aliens. And we have been blessed by being in this country, and we are proud to be in this country. And we wish that for all who follow us. Sanctuary city is a term that if you've been listening to NPR in the last few days, they've reminded you, has no definition. There is no agreed definition of it. So therefore, to pass legislation based on a term that has no meaning makes no sense. This bill, even with your amendment, I think can be read to put an unfunded mandate on your localities. And I think that as the state of Virginia, you're not very happy when the federal government gives you unfunded mandates. And I think following suit, you should not do it to the next.
Mr. Chairman, before she leaves.
Ma'am, I believe there may be a question. Is there a question? Or stop the clock?
You as the minister, Mr. Chairman, you as the minister come and read us the passages in the Bible, and many of us read it also. Explain to us how God in the Judges spoke to the judges to drive the Philistines out of the city of Israel and destroy it.
In the midst of that context, and if you heard the context of that reading is that the Philistines were in fact causing dissension at that moment. And our aliens, we have no reason to think that
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Carrico.
So, illegals that do illegal acts, we should protect them? Is that what you're saying?
I did not say that. What I said was that forcing your local governments to do work that they would not normally take on is an unfunded mandate. The federal government has their own force to enforce called ICE. We do not have to take on the part of that they're enforcing their laws. The federal law is to be enforced by the federal government, not by the local.
So being a Mr. Chairman, final question, being a minister and knowing the scriptures, if the Israelites had done as instructed by God, they wouldn't be dealing with the Gaza Strip and the Palestinians or the Philistines of the day.
True, they would have learned how to work together, and they would have been given each other stewardship.
The scriptures.
The scriptures call for us to always offer hospitality. When you offer hospitality to the stranger, you are often entertaining angels. And by the way, in response to that, Senator Stanley, and a question you asked the other day, yes, I have let somebody I found in my house that I had not invited in stay for many months.
Ma'am, I never asked you that question.
I asked the question.
So, and let's move on from Bible Jeopardy into the next speaker.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Margie Del Castillo. I'm with the Virginia Latina Advocacy Network, mobilizing Latina communities in the Northern Virginia area. We're here today to oppose HB 2000. HB 2000 would undermine protections for victims of crime and survivors of domestic violence. This hardline stance on immigration enforcement only serves to discourage the reporting of crimes and may entangle victims of domestic violence in immigration enforcement actions. As such, these policies place more victims in harm's way, and they represent a backward step to serious efforts that could help local community members work together to identify real criminals. Like you, our communities want and deserve to feel safe. Today, more immigrant families are living in a state of fear, fearful to leave their homes to seek help and support even in trusted areas of their communities, which presents significant challenges for immigrant families' abilities to meet their basic needs and improve their well-being. Thank you.
Ma'am? Now, I've represented a gentleman who I'm very fond of, who's an illegal immigrant. Because of his family ties back in Mexico, the drug cartels came up and basically forced him into selling drugs that they were transporting into our rural areas. You're not against trying to rid those drug cartels, those people that harm people within that illegal community, are you? I mean, if a sanctuary city said we're not going to turn over anybody who's an illegal alien, but in the scenario that I've just given you, you don't support leaving those cartels, and I'm telling you, it scared those families, threatened the families back home in Mexico to kill them and force them into doing things. You don't support that, do you?
What I'm against is the turning into criminals of regular, everyday immigrants.
But again, if you can answer my question, you would admit, I mean, I've seen it, and a very good man who was working very hard, had no criminal history, was forced into doing something that he wouldn't do by a cartel or influenced by a gang out of Mexico. Let's call him a cartel. You're not for a city protecting that person that forces that otherwise good person by threats to their family. You're not into protecting them the same way that you would the innocent, would you?
No, I'm in for protection of all immigrants who are here, who are not committing crimes, and who are just here trying to live their lives peacefully.
So you're saying your advocacy is for all immigrants, whether they're committing, a member of a cartel, forcing other immigrants into lives of crime?
No, that's not what I said.
Oh, I'm just
at all.
asking.
Yeah, no, that's not what I said. That's
You
not-
said you're for all immigrants. If you could restate that for me, I'd appreciate it.
I'm supportive of all immigrants who are here trying to live their lives peacefully and safely in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I don't believe that HB 2000 serves to provide that purpose for our communities.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Next. Now, look, there's 2 minutes left on the clock. Who's left to speak? Raise your hand. Anybody on this side? All right, I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock, okay? Because I'm a nice guy.
All right.
Hi.
My name is Paul Dolce,
Hi, Paul. Welcome.
and I am representing 1,144 people who have signed a petition.
So everybody in the audience and also the member committee, I got an email from Catherine Carey,
That's correct.
who said that you were bringing, this is a petition in opposition to House Bill 2000. It has a total of 991 signatures in opposition
At that time, yes.
at that time when it was sent to me. So we are receiving that, putting that into the record, so we appreciate that. Please speak to that if you will, Paul.
All right. Rather than reading the petition, I'll just read.
That's fine. If you want to read it, stop the clock for him. Since we'll just put this in the record, you could read the petition. I read it earlier. Yeah. Let's read go ahead and read the petition.
I oppose Virginia House Bill 2000 because it will likely require Virginia state and local police to enforce federal immigration law, in part by identifying and detaining local immigrant residents for possible deportation. Virginia already has some of the strictest laws in the nation regarding the enforcement of federal immigration law, including status checks for those arrested and a presumption against bail if a detainer has been placed on an immigrant is accused of a violent crime. Why should our state and local law enforcement, which already is fully occupied with responsibilities assigned it by our local governments, bear the burden of enforcing federal law? And why should the citizens of Virginia pay for it? HB 2000 will actually make our communities less safe and interfere with local law enforcement, as immigrant crime witnesses and immigrants who ordinarily would offer enforcement information to assist our police may actually avoid police contact for fear of questions about their status.
Thank you. That will be put in the record. Thank you, John. That will now be made a part of the record of this proceeding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and thank you for bringing that petition. We appreciate it. Great. Yes, ma'am. All right, roll it.
My name is Marie Giblin, and I'm with the Virginia Interfaith Center. But I'm also I'm a retired professor, but I now teach 8 to 11-year-olds in religious education at Sacred Heart on Perry Street. And I'm a constituent of Senator Sturtevant. And I'm just afraid that this kind of law, even this kind of discussion, it was so confusing right in the room, that this is going to cause confusion among police. I think it's going to be a hardening of attitudes. And I'll tell you, these 8 to 11-year-olds are terrified. They are terrified. And this Sunday, we prayed in church for all the members who had let people know that they're afraid to come to church, that if they're not going to work, they're staying home. So the whole thing about community policing, et cetera, but it's also, what are you doing to our moral fabric in the city, our whole sense of ourselves? Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for coming and thank you for your advocacy. Yes, ma'am. 3 minutes left, so you each get a minute. So, Father, you're behind her, so you're going to speak to her. Okay, go.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and senators, and also want to give a shout out to Senator Donovan, my senator. I want to thank you very much for considering today's amendment. That actually is something that I had written to Senator Donovan about. I was very happy to see that part of the bill come out.
You got a great senator.
Pardon?
You have a great senator. I won't hold that against you.
I'm speaking today just on behalf of myself, but to tell you I am a member of the Richmond Friends meeting, the Quaker meeting in town. We've been here since 1795. I haven't been here that long. But, and by the way, I've really enjoyed your sense of humor, Senator Stanley.
Oh, you're very kind. No one else does, so
I do think that the bill, and I know that Delegate Poindexter's faith is strong, and as a Quaker, we are charged to walk cheerfully, or the world answering to that of God and everyone. And so I know that the Delegate Poindexter comes to this from his own personal point of view and faith. But I must say that I feel very strongly that we must not look at the immigrant community with the fear that keeps being espoused in our media. But to move, it does engender fear in that community, and in the long run actually jeopardizes our public safety. I do also want to say that the community policing is an important part of this, and I do think that this bill would call into question it would call into question and raise questions in all our localities about what the proper role of police should be in working with immigrant communities. So thank you very much. I just do hope that you will vote against House Bill 2000.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for your advocacy and your compliment about my humor. Now I'm going to give you each a minute, okay?
Okay, I'll go quick.
So,
I reside in the...
Hold on. Put a minute on there. Well, she's giving you 5 minutes. We've got to go back. She's giving, all right, a minute each. That way everybody gets to speak. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. I live in Richmond. I was going to say I reside in the secular, but I do share the opinion of many people who have spoken before me. I have concerns about public safety.
And your name is?
Amber Hendricks.
Hi, Amber.
Hi. My father was a police officer in Virginia, and I believe you spoke about one of your friends who was intimidated into illegal activity. But if we have a strong community police system in place, people feel more comfortable going to their local law enforcement. When you create a community of fear among large groups of people, you don't serve any of us. You jeopardize public safety. Also, my sister-in-law's family is Mexican, and I have a 4-year-old niece and a 6-year-old nephew who are terrified because the message behind a bill like this is palpable. My nephew has asked if his grandmother's dog will protect him. That's for real. I ask you to please vote against this. It sends a terrible message. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, sir. Please step forward, say your name.
My name is Reverend Jay McNeil, and you don't have to call me father. I'm a Baptist.
Oh, sorry.
I worship at First Unitarian Universalist Church, but I wanted to read into
I'm
the
a
record.
recovering Methodist. Is that about the same? I'm now a Baptist. So, do you know the difference between a Methodist and a Baptist? The Methodist will say hi to you in the liquor store. Come on, that's funny.
There are a lot of Baptist churches about it.
I thought you guys thought I was funny. All right, I'm sorry. Sir, Reverend.
This has been distributed to all of you, but I wanted to have it read into the record, sort of the history of how this bill has been handled so far. And I did hear your apology both at 10 a.m. this morning or 10:30 when we had our 10 a.m. meeting, and this afternoon. January 10th, the bill was referred to the House Courts of Justice Committee. I'd like to correct what happened on February 1st. The bill was never assigned to the House Courts of Justice Criminal Law Subcommittee, but was put on the agenda at approximately 7 p.m. So few advocates were present and people were not informed that the bill was being heard. There was no public comment on the bill. The bill passed out 8-3. February 3rd, after a complaint about the shady process, the bill was reheard on February 3rd and passed out a second time on a vote of 6-3. Later, February 3rd, the bill passed out of the full House Courts of Justice on 14-6 vote. February 7th, the House passed the bill 63-33. The next day, the bill was referred to the Senate Courts of Justice and scheduled on the agenda for 8 a.m. on February 13th. However, February 13th, when advocates showed up at 8 a.m. to oppose the bill, they were told that the bill was being referred to the Senate Local Government Committee and would be heard the following afternoon. Then on February 14th, advocates returned to oppose the bill, which failed to report on a 6-6 vote. February 17th, sometime late Friday afternoon, around 4 p.m. or so, word emerged that the bill would be reconsidered on Monday morning, February 20th at 10 a.m. today. Today at 10 a.m., advocates showed up to fill this room in opposition to the bill. They were told that one senator was not present, and thus the meeting would be postponed until the afternoon. At the earliest, we expected about 1 o'clock. So we reconvened at 1 o'clock. And at about 4:15, we started this meeting. I think we have a chamber full of people behind me who may define privilege. It's been very difficult to participate in the process. I'm a person of privilege, and I had a lot of difficulty participating and having my voice heard on this bill. There are a lot of people who have been trying to be heard. I'd love it if you give another 30 minutes, because there's a lot more opposition.
Reverend, if I can address, look, I've had 22 bills that helped poor, disadvantaged, pre-kindergartners, a lot of poverty in my area. You should have seen what happened to my bills. I don't think that it is just due to this bill. I think sometimes it is universal, what happens over there. Sometimes I have some real complaints about it, about the process. I hope that you understand that even in spite of the bill, this bill should have been assigned when it came over to this committee. It was not. When it did not pass on the 6-6, it was because of a proxy which was left in the hands of one of our senators who did not know how to vote for that proxy. So what we normally do is we do not vote if we do not know the outcome of how that person has told us to vote on it. It would be fair. They may be opposed to it or for it. So at that point, it was left in the committee, all right? And so at that moment, then it was asked that this come back up. It's still within the breast at 6-6. So I tried to schedule a hearing. I could have done this, Reverend, at my desk in the chamber, which I did not think was fair. And I think many members of my committee sitting to my left, you're right, believe that that was not fair, a good way of doing it. So we brought it back, and we were hoping that we could have gotten off the ground earlier this morning. It just didn't work out. But in spite of that, I could have dealt with this and just had a vote, a presentation, no more litigation of this matter, no more hearing of people who were for or against it, and just voted. But I believe that in advocacy and transparency, you've gotten, between the two, there was a very good back and forth discussion, I thought, the last time we heard it. We have opened the floor again. You were the last one to speak. And I think, that's the best I can do under the circumstances. So I hope that your frustrations have, or at least with the House, and understand that we're trying to give everyone an opportunity to be heard on this, because we know how important it is for both sides. And so I understand your frustration. I understand, that you've had to come back. This is how our process works. And certainly I hope that you've not found that anything that I, or the members of this committee or my staff have done, have not been with full transparency through the process. It's the best I could do. And I apologize for any discomfort, any inconvenience that this has caused. I truly do. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your advocacy coming here today.
It costs a lot.
Thank you, sir. All right. Delhi Point Exeter, you have the right to clear,
30
as we
seconds.
always give.
I'd like to respond to a couple of things.
Absolutely.
I know that the name of the United Methodist Church is United Methodist Church, and I remember when it went together to form that name, but I can assure you that it doesn't speak with one voice, and neither do the Baptists, neither do the Catholics, and neither does anyone else, or I wouldn't be standing here in front of you.
Sure.
There was a comment, I think, about 1795. I haven't been here that long either. My family started in Jamestown in 1657, and I'm from Lansing, my family since 1792. We started local Methodist Church, and there are many people who have different views on this. As far as the definition of sanctuary, I would just go and read the Richmond Times-Dispatch. I thought they had the best of I've read anywhere, and I've done a lot of reading. It's just simple says jurisdictions that set roadblocks up to blocking laws. One thing I did not hear, and I'm sorry for it, maybe I missed it, and that's the sympathy for the victims of someone that does take advantage of a sanctuary situation, that goes out and does something really bad. I heard comments on unfunded mandates and that type of thing. I don't see, certainly the way the bill is amended, that the locals are going to be required to go out and enforce or do any of the things that was mentioned in that. And I don't see any fiscal impact in it as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Move report.
Mr. Chairman, substitute motion.
There's a motion without a second, so you cannot have a substitute motion until there's a second. The motion is to report. Is there a second to that motion? Second. Second being properly made.
Motion to PBI this bill.
Substitute motion, is there a second? Second. Substitute motion on the table, which is considered in order, so it's last to first, would be the motion to pass this bill by indefinitely. John, call the roll. This is to PBI.
Senator Hanger.
No.
Senator Morrison.
Yes.
Senator Favola.
Yes.
Senator Lewis.
Yes.
Senator Serville by proxy.
Yes.
Senator DeStep.
No by proxy.
Senator Donovan.
No.
Senator Chase.
No.
Senator Sturman.
No.
Senator Kite by proxy.
No, by proxy.
Oh, PBI.
I'm sorry, yes, by proxy.
Too late.
Senator Carrico.
No.
Senator McClellan.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
To PBI now.
Motion fails 6 and 7.
So the primary substitute motion to pass the bill by indefinitely has failed, leaving the primary motion in place, which is to report.
As amended.
As amended. The motion is to report as amended with the second being properly made. Is there any discussion on that motion?
Mr. Chairman.
I figured you were coming. Senator Favola.
Well, I can count.
Senator Favola, I do want to thank you again for the courtesy that you extended, and that shall not be held against you, and it should not ever be held against you for that.
I appreciate that.
Not tolerate anything other than that.
I appreciate that. I can count the votes, and I can see that those sitting on your left are going to be voting to report this bill.
Senator Favola, you're on my left.
I meant from
But right in my heart.
I meant from
Right
where
in
you
my
were
heart.
sitting. So, I just want to say, you know, maybe you made a marginal improvement to this bill with the amendment, but this bill is a very bad bill on many levels. I think it sends a terrible message about who we are and what kind of community we want to build and how welcoming we want to be. I mean, the governor has said multiple times that Virginia cannot grow its economy, we cannot flourish, and we cannot really prosper unless we are welcoming and inclusive. This bill flies in the face of that very important value. It really pains me that we have to have this before us and have this kind of conversation. I mean, what's left is this one line about no locality shall adopt any ordinance, procedure, or policy, which is extraordinarily broad, that restricts the enforcement of federal immigration laws. We need to draw very bright lines between what the work of the federal government is and what the work of our jurisdictions happen to be. Our jurisdictions are really responsible day to day in keeping our neighborhoods safe. And this bill puts a very chilling effect on so many members of our communities. I represent a very diverse community. And I know that people of color in my community would be very nervous, anxious. They would feel unsafe. They won't come forward to talk to the police. And that kind of environment makes you unsafe and makes me unsafe. I cannot say in stronger words how poorly I think this bill represents Virginia. And I really, really hope that it is defeated. It is fortunate that the governor, I believe, will see the bill as I see it. So we won't have to be living under this. But I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Senator Coleman. I thank you for your consideration. Senator Haynes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel compelled just to make a brief statement on this issue because I'm the culprit, I guess, in terms of why we didn't resolve this the other evening. I was upstairs working on the budget and not paying attention to the signal to get down here. And I would not say that my proxy was voted incorrectly. I think there's a compelling testimony here on this bill from the faith community. And I thank the senator who cast my vote as an abstention because it's one of those things that you should be present in order to hear as this swings in the balance. I think the bill has been improved today. And I would further say that all of us, particularly after listening to the heartfelt testimony from members of people who have strong faith from the faith community, that we really need to continue to grapple with this in some way that will pull us together. At fault, I would criticize the federal government. And there I would criticize my own party because we've been in control in the previous Congress, had both the House and the Senate, and failed to advance legislation that could have corrected in large part the problem that the states are being confronted with right now in what to do. For myself, I live in a community in the Valley that has for a long time been a melting pot for the immigrant populations. We have a strong representation of the immigrant population. I come from a church that helps to nourish that population. And we cannot advance economically in this state. And I think, Dr. Poindexter, you would agree with this from where you live because of the fact that we do not have the labor to advance our agriculture and construction economies without the participation, particularly of the immigrant community. So I don't want to send a wrong signal with this bill. On the other hand, I'm for law and order. So I hope that this bill, if it makes it through the process, will be in a fashion that rather than sending a signal that we don't want to continue to assimilate in a respectful manner the immigrant population, but rather we just want to make sure that we're providing an appropriate level of law and order. And I hope we collectively, both sides of the aisle, will reach out to our congressmen and our new president and insist they put in place immigration law that is workable and practical. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Hanger. Senator Kirk.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say that, I'm married to my wife's mother is an immigrant. She went through the process of coming here, married a military Marine, came to this country, renounced her home country, went through the legal process, learned a new language, she's from Spain, learned how to speak the language, even though she went to Grundy when she came here. That was very tough, let's just say it that way. Probably knows more about government than most of our high school students because she made a point to learn what this country was about because she wanted to be an American, not from Spain. She went through that process. And we're a country of laws. And we're a country that abides within those borders of those laws. And if we don't take a stand and basically prohibit on this state level sanctuary cities from becoming that, what do we do next? People steal because they're hungry. People steal because they're cold. But we don't build a sanctuary for them to go. We operate within the rules of those laws, and that is what we're doing. We're setting policy saying that country or cities in this state will not build sanctuaries for people that violate laws. We are a country of laws, and you will abide and you will obey those laws. And that's why it's important that we have this legislation, and I commend Delegate Poindexter for that.
Mr. Chair.
Senator McClellan.
Thank you. I think it's important to put this bill in a larger context of a conversation happening at the national government and here in the Commonwealth. This is not a new conversation. It is as old as the Republic itself. It is as old as Jamestown, when, frankly, illegal immigrants showed up on our shores over 400 years ago and were treated hospitably, frankly. And as a result, over time, the Native American population was decimated and put on reservations. 75 years ago, because of fear and hatred of another immigrant population, a Democratic president signed an internment order that Japanese Americans would be put in camps in California. American citizens, many of whom were forced to denounce their citizenship. We now face another wave of anti-immigrant sentiment stoked in the last presidential election. In my son's school, the day after the election, there were children born in this country whose parents were here legally, who were terrified and were asking their teachers, am I going to be sent out of the country? They're citizens. There are people who were detained, who are here lawfully, some citizens, as a result of the president's order of a few weeks ago. This bill has to be viewed in that larger context of what's happening in this country. And what we are doing is sending a signal to immigrants from certain countries, let's be frank, you are not welcome here. And what is happening is American citizens are also afraid. American citizens, people who came here lawfully, but because of the federal government's dysfunction, their papers may have lapsed, are living in fear. The woman who is being abused is afraid to report, and this bill is going to make that worse, because she's afraid when she shows up to report, her abuser is going to call ICE and say, go get him. That is not going to make anyone safe. That is not going to make anyone safe. And we cannot ignore the larger context that this bill is being passed in, regardless of the gentleman's intention. There are communities, the rise in anti-immigrant violence since November has skyrocketed. We cannot ignore that larger context, and this bill is only going to make that problem worse. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else? Seeing none? All right, is it the committee's pleasure to reverse the votes, or do you want to go with another roll call here? Motion on the table. The motion to report is properly on the table, the primary motion. There's a second being properly made. Discussion has been had. John, call the roll. This is to report, not to PBI, to report.
Senator Hanger?
Yes.
Senator Morrison?
No.
Senator Pavola?
No.
Senator Lewis?
No.
Senator Searville?
No.
Senator DeStep, by proxy?
Yes.
Senator Donovan?
Yes.
Senator Chase?
Yes.
Senator Sturman?
Yes.
Senator Pike, by proxy?
No.
Senator Carrico?
Yes.
Senator McClellan?
No.
To report, yes. The bill report 760 will be then sent to the floor for a 3 read. I'll be voted on, John, by Friday? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Thursday. So, of course, bills are never passed until they're passed. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for coming. I appreciate your patience. Delegate Poindexter, your bill reports 7 to 6 on reconsideration. Ladies and gentlemen, I again want to thank you for the decorum you have shown, and the Senate Committee on Immigration shall rise.
I thought that was the case. He walked through.